Sejam bem-vindos à Conferência Nacional pela Paz nas escolas. Esta é uma série de entrevistas que reúne especialistas e lideranças para refletirmos sobre os caminhos para uma escola mais segura, acolhedora e justa, discutindo temas como saúde mental, combate à violência nas escolas e o protagonismo juvenil. Hoje temos a honra de conversar com Celina de Sola, cofundadora da Glasswing International, uma organização que atua em mais de uma dezena de países, promovendo justiça social, saúde mental e apoio comunitário em contextos de alta vulnerabilidade. A Celina é formada pela Universidade da Virgínia, com mestrado pela Universidade da Pensilvânia e pela Harvard Kennedy School, e tem se dedicado há anos à criação de espaços seguros para juventudes afetadas pela violência. Celina, é uma alegria enorme tê-la conosco. Para iniciar nossa conversa, convido o Edu para fazer a primeira pergunta.
Celina, thank you so much for being here with us. It is an absolute honor to have Young Peace Builders' top one, biggest inspiration, our guiding light, as an interviewee and someone that we'll be learning from throughout this session. I will make the question in Portuguese, then translate it to English and give the floor to you. But, pessoal, nessa entrevista com a Celina de Sola, algo que nos inspira muito é que há mais de 25 anos ela está nessa jornada de inovação social. E nós, enquanto jovens líderes pela paz, nós estamos no começo, né? Você que está no seu ensino médio e está organizando atividades na sua escola, muitas vezes a gente não sabe o que o futuro nos espera. Mas eu acho que algo que vai ser muito legal a gente ouvir da Celina é sobre qual foi o momento na vida dela que ela decidiu que a vida inteira seria dedicada à inovação social e a utilizar, por exemplo, a saúde mental para a redução de conflitos. Então, eu vou traduzir agora essa pergunta para inglês, que a gente vai ter a oportunidade de conhecer mais a trajetória dela, e a gente vai ouvir a resposta dela, e você vai poder acompanhar na legenda a tradução em português. Celina, so the question is, Young Peace Builders is formed by students who are either in their middle or high school and are starting to organize social innovation activities for their peers, usually trying to use mental health, conflict resolution tools to prevent conflict. And I think something that draws a lot of inspiration from us is that you've been on this journey for more than 25 years. And sometimes when we get a little bit unhopeful about what we're seeing in the world, listening to a story like yours makes us persist. So I would love for you to share those early years. Was there a critical moment in your trajectory when you realized that you were ready to dedicate your whole life to social innovation and building safer and better environments for the youth in the world? And I think that will allow us to connect with your trajectory and relate as we're going through, I would say, perhaps the beginning of your trajectory in these years of our youth.
You know, it's interesting because a lot of social entrepreneurs, even if you don't start your own organization, a lot of social entrepreneurs actually start thinking about this when they're in middle school or high school. So and they've done research on this. So it's interesting. So many of you peace builders are in middle school and high school, and that's when we really start understanding, I think, that we can do something. Even though sometimes it feels like a problem's too big, I think knowing and understanding that you can do something, even if sometimes it feels small, it's never small, right? So I think in middle school, in high school is an ideal time, because even if you decide to do something different later on, whether it's as a social entrepreneur innovator, the experience of working right now in schools, in mobilizing other young people, working with other young people is probably, I think it's the best foundation for anything you do later on. You know, in my case, I did decide, I went to college and I studied lots of different things because I didn't know exactly. That's the other thing. You don't have to know right now what you want to do the rest of your life, even though sometimes there's pressure. If you just know you want to do something and improve your community, your country, or the world, that is enough to give you the conviction and tenacity to do it. That means, you know, you could end up doing it through the government. You could end up doing it through an organization. You could end up doing it even through the private sector. But I think the most important thing is to stick by that commitment and the belief that you can do it. And you know, we're all working in mental health. You guys and me, we're peers, right? So for me, you know, my specific trajectory, I decided in college to try lots of different things. I studied psychology, political science. I took classes in social work. I took classes in anthropology just to learn about people's interaction with each other, with their environment, and just to learn, period, and make friends. And in that process, I think after I finished school, and I did study initially, I graduated with a political science degree, and then I got my master's in social work because I realized that I wanted to do something. Again, I didn't know what, but I knew I wanted to make a difference. And then I think as far as the social innovation piece, I had volunteered like all of you in middle school and high school. So that volunteering also prepared me to be able to interact with different people. And I think that's one of the skills that's been the most helpful in this work, especially if we are all trying to be peaceful. I think the innovation, I think that relationships is probably the secret sauce. And for me as an innovator, I didn't know that we were going to start an organization. I think we found an opportunity in El Salvador, where we started Glasswing, to bring sectors together. And we started just volunteering in schools, working with kids who are going to schools and communities that faced really, really high rates of gang violence. And we just wanted to be a caring person in their life, that, you know, as volunteers. And that actually evolved into the organization that we are now. So, you know, I will say that the trajectories can all be different. I just think that you're all already doing this. You're being innovators and you're being, you know, you're taking action. So I think that's a really exciting and probably the most foundational part of the process as a social innovator, is really believing in this and committing to it with your time, not just your ideas.
That's great. That's great. Thank you again for all your credits. Let me introduce myself first. I'm Igor. I'm one of the early co-founders of the project. Now I already graduated. I'm a lawyer, but especially in the beginning of the project, we worked a lot, and I can relate a lot with your experience and our experience in the project. So I have one question for you too, but I'll first introduce it in Portuguese and then right after translate it to English. Well, em português, pessoal, primeiro, depois a gente traduz para o inglês. Um dos projetos mais impactantes que você lidera, Celina, trabalha com jovens expostos a traumas severos, como violência comunitária e o abandono institucional. Como você enxerga o papel das escolas nesse contexto, como estudantes, e como gestores podem transformar a comunidade escolar em espaços de cura e pertencimento? Okay, so now in English, the question. One of your most impactful initiatives works with youth exposed to severe trauma, such as community violence and institutional neglect. So how do you see the role of schools in this context? Can they truly become spaces of healing and belonging? And if so, how?
You know, I think
so
the
much.
school, yes, the school, I think, plays an absolutely critical role. I think we see the school like you, I think, from what I know from working with Eduardo these couple of years, the school is a center of community, right? The parents know where the school is. Everybody knows where the school is. And perhaps, even though sometimes there's oftentimes violence in the school, maybe it feels safer than not being in the school. So it's like, and sometimes it doesn't, but the point is the school is where people convene, parents, teachers, students, former students. So that is, for us, probably the most important point of intervention, so to speak, or the point to work in. It also houses young people that I think in so many of our countries and so much of the world, you know, at the end of the day, the potential of people is all the same. It's just the opportunities aren't presented to everybody the same way, or they aren't presented to people at all. So for us, it's like, you know, potential's everywhere, but opportunity isn't. So the school is the best place to really invest in the most important resource that our countries have, which is our young people. And when kids are exposed to violence, and as mental health practitioners, all of you know this, and like you, we also work in mental health from a non-clinical perspective. we work in mental health from the public health standpoint. I also studied public health in school, but I think I've learned more by working in the space than actually studying it, actually. And I think the school, because it has like a physical space, because you have so many different minds there, so many different perspectives, it creates the physical space that we can work on. If it isn't safe, a physical space that you can work on to create something that feels safer, that feels warmer, acogedor, like we say in Spanish and similar to the Portuguese. And I think it also is a place where the community can become involved in a different way, right? So I think everybody agrees it's not a political place, so to speak, in the way that other places, it's not a polarized space necessarily, or it shouldn't be. So it creates an environment that's ideal to share information about mental health, about violence prevention, about peace building, and to create generations over time of people who talk about these things in a different way, who talk about them as something that's important. You know, we talk about it in a way that can interrupt perhaps patterns that exist that are negative around violence, and we can understand violence and have a common language around the different kinds of violence, because sometimes we live in contexts of violence, but we don't even see it as something that's violence, or we don't categorize it as violence because we don't know any different. So the relationship between peers, or the relationship between a teacher and a student, there may be interactions that are violent and we don't even know. So how do we build these restorative spaces? By providing people with the information and the tools that they can use to support themselves. Like we do a lot of psychoeducation, which means we talk to people about the brain science of the relationship between your feelings, your thoughts, and your behavior, right? So your emotions, thoughts, behaviors as three separate but complementary things, and understanding the way our brain works in easy to understand terms for all of us that aren't neuroscientists, how we can understand how to regulate our own emotions, manage our own emotions, and therefore also interact differently with other people. Because if we understand the science of it, then we understand that people's behaviors don't mean they're bad people. It's a behavior, right? It's not a personal characteristic or personality trait that's permanent. So I think the really exciting thing about schools is that schools are places of learning, that schools are centers of community, and they're perfect places to share information about building peace, about preventing violence, about understanding that people can change, that interactions can change, that cultures and paradigms can change. So what better place to do that? And then as new kids come in, once we've changed the culture from the inside, all of us as part of the school community, that perpetuates over time a different way of interacting between peers, between parents and kids, between teachers and kids, administrators. So I think it's absolutely key, challenging sometimes, but absolutely key, because we want to work within systems so we can improve systems, not work outside of systems.
Oi, Cecília, meu nome é Simon Quetinilha, eu sou aqui do estado de Sergipe, no estado do Brasil, e a gente admira muito sua trajetória, tudo que ela carrega, o projeto, certo? Puxando um pouco desse gancho sobre o papel que as escolas têm nesse contexto e como elas podem transformar a escola em uma comunidade resiliente, em um espaço seguro emocional, a gente queria saber um pouco mais sobre como a Glasswing, ela fala muito sobre essas comunidades resilientes e espaços seguros. Quando a gente olha, de fato, para as escolas públicas brasileiras, a gente consegue enxergar que, tipo, são muitas camadas de exclusão e violências e outros aspectos negativos que acabam influenciando na escola. Então, a gente queria saber um pouco mais como que a gente pode começar a criar esses espaços seguros de segurança emocional dentro da rotina escolar.
Translating to English, so Simone said, Glasswing often talks about resilient communities and safe spaces. But when we look at Brazilian public schools with so many layers of exclusion, what are some practices you have observed as effective in creating emotionally safe environments within vulnerable communities?
Yeah, I think it's very, like Simone said, it's so complex. There's so many layers. And it really is. So that means that our work becomes more complex because the challenge is complex. And I think building resilient communities, they start from building on the existing strengths of communities, right? So even though we have these complexities and challenges in schools and communities, how do we do a map, so to speak, or a mental map of the resources and the strengths that communities have? Because if not, it's easy to get overwhelmed with the challenges and the enormity, especially in Brazil, of an entire education system, even in one city or one state. And I think for us, that kind of the universe that is each school, because they're all so different too, right? And then they change if the director changes or something changes. So it's like we start all over. And I think that the mental health work that we do and that you do as peace builders is a way to at least, like I was saying before, I think if we're understanding, because sometimes the exclusion can come from different factors, right? From stigma, from different kinds of discrimination, from assumptions we make about people and their families and what their potential is, assuming, oh, it's not worth it to work with these young people because they're never going to become anything, or, whatever it is, or they come from such and such community. And our work started from the beginning. We wanted to focus on the communities that face the most stigma and the most exclusion and poverty and violence, because we knew that that was one thing that was really important for us as an organization, that we wanted to show that that's not true, right? That every single child, every single young person is not only deserving of the same opportunities, but also does really have the same potential to do incredible things. And I do think that the more we understand the why of people's behaviors, and also understand that a lot of times people's behaviors are a result of something that is happening to you. It's not because you just want to behave that way. For us, that kind of the awareness around mental health tends to also have an impact on the compassion and the space that's created for people to feel safe and thrive. So, for example, if a student, and I'll talk now about like a teacher-student relationship. So if a student is misbehaving, right? Misbehaving, whatever that means to someone in a classroom, and the practice is, in Honduras, Guatemala, wherever we're working, is to say, no, that, just get them out of the class, go somewhere else, go figure it out. You're misbehaving, you're being disruptive. That then becomes a pattern, and then that child becomes labeled as trouble, or you start kind of perpetuating that exclusion and that stigma on the lives of children and their educational experience, their learning experience. So if we're able to work on these things from a more restorative lens and equip schools with those kind of tools to understand that, number one, again, the behaviors are consequence of stimuli, which includes something that the teacher may have done, something that this person's experiencing in their life somewhere else. That changes the way, what we see as teachers, once they're trained and understand mental health, and young leaders also, it changes the way they interact with someone that perhaps before they would exclude, marginalize, stigmatize, discriminate against, because you realize that that's a judgment you're making about someone that's not founded on fact, and it's a judgment, it's a reaction. The other thing is, I think mental health, when we understand the science of it, we also can kind of understand that when we have opinions or judgments about someone, it's something that we can change. So it's one understanding that behaviors are separate from the person's personality. So discrimination and stigma and exclusion is it's profoundly unjust and unfair. And then the other is, we can actually change the way we're behaving with people that we're discriminating against. And I think across peer relationships too, you can't really, and you know this, build peace if we're also being confrontational about it. So how do we establish a common language around building peace, around violence, and focus more on that? That's why I like peace builders as opposed to violence prevention. It's a more constructive framing. So within the peace building, and the concept of peace building is broad enough that it does imply that building peace has to be inclusive. And I think that that's where, when we've talked about this with Eduardo, that's where you think about integrating mental health into conversations about building peace is critical, because we do fall into patterns of discrimination, of stigma, of just mistreatment and the perpetuation of violence. They become patterns. And what we find is a lot of times people's patterns and reactions to other people may be founded in things like fear. The discrimination may be founded in something like fear. It's not that someone's just a bad person. So once we start understanding that, then we can help that person change by providing them with the information and tools. So they're changing from within. So it's almost like you're acknowledging something in yourself and the way you react to things, so then that you can apply to your interaction with other people. So I do think that that the work in schools to address that, I think that working on the well-being, on the mental health is absolutely key to preventing or mitigating, even if preventing takes longer, mitigating the impacts of discrimination, of exclusion, and all these other things, because you really see it in yourself. You have to see it in yourself and be well yourself in order to be able to be better at what you do, whether you're a student, a teacher, a nurse, police officer, anybody. Does that make sense, Simone? Yeah, okay.
Yeah, totally.
Tell me if I'm being very confusing on that. Tell me, because in my head, sometimes it makes sense and then it doesn't want to say it.
No, it totally makes sense. And I think like when we were elaborating our mental health program with Child Mind Institute, we thought a lot about what you just said about being well before you help others, like for students and teachers, and a lot about like mitigating stigma and mental health. So I think it's like it totally makes sense. We can understand what you're saying, like because we are living this right now. But yeah, my next question, first in Portuguese. Bom, Celina, você estudou em instituições como a Universidade da Virgínia, Harvard, UPenn, e ao mesmo tempo você está em contato direto com comunidades vulneráveis todos os dias. O que os jovens e as iniciativas como os Jovens Líderes pela Paz podem aprender com essa combinação entre formação acadêmica e vivência local? E na sua visão, quais são as melhores formas de equilibrar os dados científicos com os relatos e saberes de quem vive diretamente nas comunidades? Well, Celina, you studied at institutions like University of Virginia, Harvard, and UPenn, while also staying deeply connected to vulnerable communities every day. What can young people and initiatives like Young Peace Builders learn from this combination of academic training and local experience? In your view, what are best ways to balance scientific data with histories and knowledge that come directly from communities?
So I think it's really hard to do this work if you only are doing it from a desk, right? I just think that if you don't have the experience that all of you are getting by doing this, it's really hard. Even if we think about people making decisions in public policy and in government, you always wish and hope that they've actually worked with communities, been part of, whether it's like mobilizing other people and just working at the community level to whether it's education, health, anything, environment, because I think that it's easy to come up, perhaps not easy, but it seems simple sometimes when you're drafting a project and you're like, let's do this. And then we all try to do it and it takes longer, it's more complicated, there are more hurdles. So I think that the combination, for me, it's been really important. When I was studying my master's in social work, we had to work. So it was part of your degree. And that work for me was really important because it merged the theory and the practice. I do think that the combination to be able to do both. That being said, not everybody's going to be able to go to school and get all these different degrees. So I actually find that the field work for me and I'm almost 50 now, the work with communities has been way more valuable for me in learning than any schooling. And I went back to school twice for master's degrees, but I have to say that I continue to work in this and love it because I learned so much by doing and sometimes not doing it right. And I think that, and asking constantly. So I do think that sometimes when we're on the academic side, we're asking intellectually, but when we're in the field, we're asking practically. And I think that that is really important, because at the end of the day, intellectual exercises, so to speak, even if we research and we look at the evidence, it won't translate well unless we actually design it. And you guys have heard of it, just being very human-centered and very responsive to people's priorities. So the co-design, which all of you do in your schools regularly, is the field work, the practice side, I think is really important. And I actually think, when I think about peace builders, I hope that so many of you end up someday working in public policy, because I think that we need more people in leadership positions that have worked in communities. So, I'd say research is important, academia is important, and this is my opinion, but it's only important if it's doing something to change and improve the way we work in a really practical sense. There's also just intellectual curiosity and learning. That's great. But if we're talking about building peace, about addressing the pandemic of violence that we have, of just isolation that young people are going through, and all of the things, the work in the field and the human connection, and you're young people, the most important way to mitigate the impact of trauma and stress in young people is for them to have a caring adult figure in their life. It's not medicines. It's not going, of course, some people need a psychologist and a psychiatrist and therapy, but the most important way, especially when you live in a context of chronic and acute violence and you're exposed to that, the most important thing is a caring adult figure, right? And because that creates that space of safety in that relationship, even if the rest of your context is uncertain and scary and unpredictable, having that person helps so much. So, that's where I'm like, okay, yes, the science, but what about the practice? And what about that? The simple things sometimes are the most profound and the most powerful. And all of you can also be that for your peers. And I'm sure you are, right? So it really, when you think about the power of human relationships and human connection, that's actually really exciting and empowering. Because if you pair strong relationships and you kind of multiply that in a school like you do, that does create a safer, more predictable environment. So I think in our world of prevention, I think that this research and the data and the academia should serve to support what we're doing. I heard someone recently say, you can't take the scenic route. Like, firefighters don't take the scenic route to the fire. We don't have the luxury on this planet, and we haven't forever, really, to just focus on one of these things. Like, we have to pair the things, and they have to be, everything right now has to continue to happen. Even if we don't know what we're going to do, if we're going to become innovators, social entrepreneurs, we can't stop doing what we're doing every single day, because there's a pressing need for it, So I think it's just, yes, science research supporting what we're doing, but what we're doing should inform the practice and the research. Like, I think that's constantly there has to be that feedback loop. And I think for innovators and social entrepreneurs and community leaders, that has to constantly continue, because the quality, and again, there's data, but then there's qualitative. Like, what does that mean? We can have randomized controlled trials, but what does that mean in a person's life? So we do have to balance that. And I think sometimes there's a really heavy focus on the data, which is important because we need that for policy. We need to understand the impact, and we need to understand the impact on even the costs, like how the government's going to allocate money. Why are they going to put into mental health instead of a nutrition program? We have to have those justifications, but we just have to always keep in mind also the person. And we can't separate well-being and mental health and peace from the rest of a person's experience in their life. If you're hungry, if you're living in a context of domestic intrafamiliar violence, if you're living in a context of constant threat, if you're afraid to walk to school, if you're not getting enough sleep, all of that affects your well-being. All of that affects your mental health, and all of that affects the way you interact with someone else. And the data won't capture that for everybody, So it's really making sure we think of a system of the data, but then we also think of the whole person when we think of individuals. And they're not just their behavior, they're not just what you see. There's a whole world around them that influences how they interact in school, how they interact with their environment. So that's where our rigor for research and learning has to also stay qualitative while it looks at the quantitative too.
Obrigado. Celina, a gente já consegue perceber, notório, que a funcionalidade e o impacto da Glasswing, ela não é uma coisa mais isolada. Ela é uma coisa que, comprovadamente, ela consegue ter um impacto muito grande e uma taxa de funcionalidade muito alta. Então, o que a gente gostaria de saber é que a Glasswing, né, através do programa Classmaker, ela tem se destacado na mediação de conflitos, na promoção de espaços seguros nas escolas. Então, a partir do que a senhora vivenciou na construção, na implementação desses programas, a gente gostaria de saber como foi implementar a Classmaker em diversas regiões. A gente gostaria de saber também quais práticas que a senhora tem observado que, tipo assim, são fundamentais e que tipo, vão ter uma taxa muito maior de garantir que o programa não seja uma ação isolada, como é muitas vezes aqui no Brasil, nas escolas públicas, mas sim uma intervenção que genuinamente ela conecta a realidade do território e os jovens no centro da transformação.
So, translating, Glasswing through the Classmate program has been standing out in conflict mediation and promoting safe school spaces. Based on your experience implementing Classmaker in various regions, what practice have you observed that are essential in ensuring that the program is not an isolated intervention, as, for example, happens in Brazil, but a strategy generally connected to the local context with youth at the center of transformation?
I mean, our program in the schools, we have our community schools program, which is really focused on developing skills. And then I'll say that one really important thing is that it has to be responsive to young people. Like it has to, make whatever we're doing has to make sense and be exciting for the students in the schools. Otherwise, it's just not going to work. So it seems really simple, but sometimes, especially when it's people that are a lot older that are developing programs, not like you guys, but people who, if it's not interesting and it doesn't include the perspective and the ideas of young people, it's really not going to work very well. And it's not going to exist over time. So I think that's one. The other, and the young people will make it, we'll make sure it's relevant to the broader community. The other thing that's helped us a lot in our work to make it contextual, like Simon, you were asking, is we do a community café comunitario with families. So we'll have gatherings with parents and teachers where you sit in it's World Cafe methodology, actually. It's a methodology where you just have conversations, but the topics aren't dictated. They're topics that people bring up at the table. And I think that that's a really important way to make sure that it's relevant and relatable and important to those involved, because we do want to have parents involved in school, or caretakers if it's not the parents, whoever people are living with. And then the last thing I'll say is for programs to be successful, what we see is the more we can involve different sectors. So the public sector, civil society, and private sector, the better it is. The more people are involved and the more accountability there is. And you've done a great job of this, the work you guys are doing. I think it's important in whatever way to try to keep different sectors involved. And then even within the public sector, like our governments tend to silo. There's like Ministry of Health, Ministry of Education. Maybe there's a youth department. So I think if we can find ways to integrate different public sector actors, municipality, state government, I think those things are also really important to make it contextual and also have as much impact as possible, because none of us can be everywhere. So we need the public systems. And that's where, even if we don't agree with everything that the people in government may be doing, state government, local government, I think we have to find ways to work together across sectors and across different actors to get to achieve more impact and be able to mobilize. But I think both, again, the macro level and also the community level, to make sure that we're responding. Those are some of the things that we do, and just try to keep very just authentic and independence. The organization's independence from anything partisan is super important, so we can outlive any sort of government transition. So collaboration doesn't mean you become part of someone's political agenda. It just means that your agenda is young people, it's peace, it's public systems. It's not, so you're accountable, you and us, to the population. We're not accountable to any government party, but we can still partner, and just make that really clear. And that's always been really important, both at the community level and also when we're trying to affect policy change or influence decision making in any way.
Thank you so much, Celina. I think all these contributions are very insightful, especially this part you mentioned about this integration between what the public administration can do as policy and what we as agents of transformation can also do. I have one more question. First, I'll ask it in Portuguese and then translate it. Celina, recentemente as organizações não governamentais têm sido tremendamente afetadas pela nova administração dos Estados Unidos, com cortes de verbas e uma mudança sistemática na arquitetura do sistema de desenvolvimento do mundo inteiro. A gente gostaria de ouvir da sua parte como que você, aprendendo, né, sobre essa resiliência das organizações, e como que a Glasswing International está se adaptando e resistindo e continuando a inovar nesses tempos de mudança. So now in English. Celina, recently nonprofits have been tremendously affected by the new administration in the United States, with funding cuts and seismic shifts in the architecture of the development institutions in the world. And we'd like to hear from you about what you've learned about organization resilience, and how this Glasswing International has been adapting, resisting, and innovating in these times of change.
I mean, that's a big question, right, Igor? I mean, and we were affected. We lost 40% of our funding. So it's been a huge hit for our organization, and we had to let go of so many colleagues that, just amazing people. So it's been very devastating. And you know what we've been doing as an organization is learning from the mental health work we do at an individual level. Like, how do you build resilience at an individual level? And how do you think about the tenacity, the determination that we all want to build, and understanding that, you're going to face difficult things, but how do you, it's almost like we think about it, I think at an individual level, because I had to give a talk about abundance mindset right after we had these huge cuts. And I was like, oh my gosh, what am I going to say? I'm not in an abundance mindset, right? You're like, how do we, and so I was really looking back at the brain science, and when thoughts affect you as an individual or an organization, it's understanding that a thought is a thought. So a thought that says, that's it, we're going to disappear, we don't have the funding, now they're, the government's threatening to, remove the nonprofit status. So you can take it that way, and our brains will sometimes default, not just individual brains, but institutional brains, to the worst case scenario. And it's almost like training our brains at an individual level, and then at an organizational level, to say, okay, that the dooms thinking, the negative thinking isn't fact, it's a thought. So then what can I do to replace that thought with something more related to resiliency? So what if instead of saying, okay, this is terrible, because it is, it's terrible. But then how do you think, okay, what does this mean for us as an organization? How do we streamline? How do we become more efficient? How do we really think about what our main goals are? And what's the best way to get there with quality and integrity? And I think that we've been doing that exercise a lot now as an organization, like flipping the thinking from like, oh my gosh, everything, the world is going to, everything, the climate, everything's going south, and kind of observing that and saying, it feels like it. And there are many things that, yes, are going badly, but switching it. And I think that's been helpful. And then obviously just strategies. there's diversifying funding sources, collaboration, partnerships, more and more and more relevant because it's just more cost effective to do things in partnership. And talking a lot to funders and government, and just finding, innovating constantly and finding different ways. So those are some of the things that we're doing, but I'll say one of the biggest and most important is working even more in partnership with other organizations, and upping our communication. We're constantly in touch about this, and how we navigate this. So it's a real thing, but mindset is really important right now. And then also taking the moments to just curl up into a ball and be upset about it. It's okay, and angry and frustrated. But yes, I'm angry, I'm frustrated, but now what do we need to also do, in a practical sense and strategic sense? So.
Yeah, I think all of us here get that because as change makers, we are in this constant fight to like not believe the thought and think of radical action and how we can solve that challenge we faced while trying to work with schools, trying to work with government. And I think we just go back to what you're saying earlier about being well to help others. And yeah, it's a fight. It's not easy, but I think it's in the end of the day, it's grateful to see that this fight is worth it for the students and the schools. So, last question, first in Portuguese. Celina, muitos dos jovens que vão assistir essa entrevista vivem em escolas públicas em contextos violentos, tanto dentro do contexto escolar quanto fora dele. Se você pudesse deixar uma mensagem diretamente para eles sobre o poder que eles têm para transformar a escola e o mundo à sua volta, qual seria? Well, Selena, many of the young people watching this interview attend public schools and experience violence both inside and outside the school environment. So, if you could leave a message directly for them about the power they have to transform their schools and the world around them, what would it be?
I know that I draw almost every ounce of inspiration and motivation and determination from the young people that I get to meet. And I think that that is great to know that people believe in you, like that I can say to you, I believe in the power you have to affect change, can also be sometimes a lot of pressure, right? So I think like I want to say like I'm saying this not from a place to put more pressure, because I actually do know, and I see it all the time, how young people can drive change. But I think the thing I will say, and that you just said it, Anna, too, I think as change makers, as leaders, find things that also make you feel good, and that spaces for you to feel safe and okay and joy and comfort, whatever that is. And I think that can be, the self-care can be at an individual level. I love animals and nature. I love to dance. So I dance one song every morning. And this sounds so silly, but it changes my day, because at least I can come in with more optimism. But you're also facing situations where maybe you're afraid to walk to school. Maybe you're facing violence every single day. So I think you're all so resourceful already. And you have determination, you have resilience, you have all these things. But sometimes you can also get tired. And I think I would say, so I don't know what you experience, right? I can have compassion, but I don't know what your day-to-day is. But I do know that you also need moments to charge your own batteries. So I think my main message to you is, I believe in the work you're all doing so much. I've told it a lot about, I'm like, we need you guys everywhere in the world. But I also believe that you deserve to be able to find your own spaces of safety, of companionship with friends that you feel safe with, people that make you feel safe, spending time with them and doing the things you love in the moments, even if they're small moments, whatever that may be, painting, art, whatever it may be, or just sleeping, anything, reading, but find those moments for yourself, because it's not, it's a marathon, right? So we're going to need to have the energy, and it's okay. Don't feel guilty if you need to do things for yourself from time to time. and create that space. I'll end on one thing that for me really helps. There's a woman, her name is Lois Tonkin, and she studies grief. And she's like, pretend your life is this white circle. And in this white circle, there may be like these dark circles of pain or grief or loss, because many people experience, losing family members, losing friends, and they're big circles. And then sometimes people tell us that those circles are going to get smaller and the grief goes away. And we're like, it doesn't go away, or you don't know that. And what she says is, maybe the pain doesn't shrink, and those circles, if you can picture a white circle and then this dark circles, maybe those circles don't get small, but what we can do is make the white circle bigger. So if you can think about how you can make your white space bigger around the dark spaces in your life and the pain, that we can control more. We can't control the things we face in the pain, but we can control the white space around for ourselves and for other people. We can be the white space for other people, and we can seek and look for the other people to help us expand our own white space too. So when you think about taking care of yourself and supporting others, think about expanding that white space and finding moments of joy and calm and where you can, even if they're short. So, and I really thank you. I want to say thank you to all of you. Eduardo, I've loved working with you. I love meeting you all, Simone, Anna, Igor, and I hope to meet more of you because I know we're going to partner together. And hopefully we'll be able to train you guys in our mental health program in Sanamente. We'd love to do that. So I'm really, I feel a lot of gratitude for being able to speak to you today. And thank you for these questions and for your curiosity. I have a lot to learn from all of you.
Celina, we're the ones who feel immense gratitude. You played an absolutely crucial role in Young Peace Builders over these last few years. And we're so happy that we had the chance to have this interview because the goal is to celebrate your trajectory of a beacon of hope, of inspiration, of resilience, of someone who, beyond incredible, extraordinary professional abilities, has a huge human heart and a passion for the work you do that really moved us and brought Young Peace Builders to a completely different space. So thank you for your generosity. You are going to be a person that will be forever in the books and in the trajectory of Young Peace Builders, and would love for you to remain close. And we want to keep you updated. We want to keep hearing your advice. Because if we got to a better point from where we were in 2022, it's because you were part of this journey with us. So thank you from the bottom of our heart. And this is the beginning of much more, right?
Thank you.
You say.
And I'm a huge fan, so I am any way I can help, and any way any of us on our team can help, I'm sure. So thank you so much. Congratulations for everything you do.
Thank you, Celina. So,
thank you.
Big collaborative work.
Yeah, it's so great to have you, an inspiration right in front of us to talk to, because your work means a lot to us too. Thank you so much.
Thank you, and you feel free to reach out. Eduardo has my WhatsApp. Take care.
Great.
Thank you,
so much again.
Celina.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
I hope it was okay. Bye.
It was great. Thank you so much.
Okay. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Bom, pessoal, e a todo mundo que assistiu a essa entrevista, a gente agradece muito por vocês estarem acompanhando essas conversas, porque elas nos ajudam a refletir sobre caminhos reais para tornar nossas escolas mais justas, mais seguras e mais acolhedoras. Conheça mais sobre o projeto Jovens Líderes pela Paz e junte-se a essa rede de transformação. Siga acompanhando as próximas entrevistas e compartilhe esse conteúdo com a sua comunidade.